afternoon and welcome to the Vale of Glamorgan Cabinet meeting on the 19th of October 2023. I'm Councillor Liz Burnett and Chair of the meeting as the Leader of the Vale of Glamorgan Council and Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources. Cabinet are dashing to join at the moment. They've been holding the fort. I'm unfortunately away from work with the virus, but we've over the lunch hour been thanking the Windrush generation for their contribution to armed forces, and so many cabinet members have been there. We've also been attending, or they've been attending, the Over 50s Forum AGM. So thank you all for standing in on that. For anyone interested, the exhibition by the Royal British Legion will be in the reception of the civic offices for a few weeks, and then it will be going on tour to libraries around the Vale. Very worthwhile having a look at. So moving on to today, if I could remind everyone present that the meeting's being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording will be archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. And if anyone wishes to speak, then we should raise hands, and either on the screen or using the digital function. The chat function should only be used to highlight any technical issues and or to attract the attention of the Democratic Services Officer or myself as Chair. Today we've actually got a full and fairly complex agenda, if my voice lasts out, with references from a number of committees, reports of recent meetings, and 22 agenda items overall, which includes one Part 2 item. So without further ado, we shall move on to the agenda proper. I shall just move some papers out of the way so we can carry on. So first item on the agenda today is agenda item 1, and that is apologies for absence. And I can see, you don't look breathless after running up the stairs, but I can see that we've got everybody present today, so that's great. I might get some water. Agenda item 2 is minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of October 2023. Can I take those as a true record? Happy to move.
And I'll second those minutes.
Thank you. Agenda item 3 is minutes, is to receive the declarations of interest, and if any, the nature of such interest. I haven't been informed of any interests today. No, we're okay on that. So we will move on to the references part of the agenda, and on this, just to go through some of the things that we've got a number of references that refer to agenda items that we have later on in the meeting. So if you look at the references, agenda items 4, 5 and 9, sorry, 4, 5 and 8 all relate to agenda item 14, the draft Vale of Glamorgan Council annual self-assessment. So I would propose to take those with the main item. Similarly, agenda item 9 relates to agenda item 15, the annual delivery plan monitoring report, Q1 performance, and agenda item 11 relates to the agenda item 17 on the agenda, the independent living policy. That's reference from Homes and Safe Communities scrutiny. So I would propose to take that with agenda item 17. So I'd move that we deal with it in that way with your agreement. It's probably a recipe for disaster to try and navigate this, but we'll give it a go. Hopefully it'll work. So therefore, item 4 we're going to take later, item 5 we're going to take later. We'll move on to agenda item 6, waiting for Matt to come in and tell me that I've forgotten something, but I think I'm okay so far. That is the reference from Governance and Audit Committee on the 18th of September 2023. That's the Audit Wales Draft Detailed Audit Plan 2023 and Q1 update on the Audit Wales work programme. This had come to us, had been with us a while back, and in effect, it was a fairly brief conversation on that. A few comments, etc., which are laid out in the reference. And the committee eventually resolved that they made two recommendations: that consideration be given to the Governance and Audit Committee seeing the statement of accounts for the Cardiff Region City Deal, the Central South Consortium, and all other joint services, namely the shared regulatory services and the joint adoption service. I'm not an expert on governance, and I think what I would suggest for us is that we actually ask those separate bodies, because they do operate as separate entities, they have their own governance arrangements, and we normally have members of those. Well, we have members of all of them that participate in that process. So actually, we'll contact them and get a view on whether or not that would be appropriate, or whether it would cause further confusion. I would imagine that all of those are probably public anyway, because most organisations would publish their own statement of accounts. But we'll check on that, and we'll respond back to the committee. And the second one is that the report and appendices be referred to Cabinet for oversight. And I think, as it is that this is a comprehensive report, and that you know, they noted it, and I think that we can do similar. So I would move that said we check out whether or not their request is actually achievable, and that we note the reference and the report, and I'd move.
And I'll second those, Leader.
Thank you. Everyone else okay? Moving on to agenda item 7. That's the revised highway maintenance 3-year plan. This is a reference from Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee, which had actually been to us previously. An interesting conversation, and I have to admit to being a bit of an anorak on this. I love this report, not least because when you have to prioritise activity, it's always really useful to have a matrix that governs your decision making. You know, how do you take the various factors into consideration? And so if you want to know why road A has been resurfaced and road B hasn't, this actually will give you the answers to that normally, and you can have a conversation. So so there was quite an interesting conversation at scrutiny, and I'm not sure whether there was a degree of confusion, because I mean, there were two recommendations that they recommended that they accept the report. That's great. And then they said that Cabinet be requested to review the Council's criteria matrix to reflect properly the needs of cyclists and ensure that roads and routes are suitable. Reflect properly the needs of cyclists, ensure that roads and routes are suitable. But the report that we'd actually sent to them, reference 5 within that report, actually talked about updating the matrix to reflect active travel and the needs of cyclists. So that is actually already in situ from the original report that was sent to them. So I'm not sure if there was a bit of confusion. So I would recommend that we note that second recommendation. Otherwise, when it goes through the tracking system, will be tracking 2, which say the same thing. So we'll note that and say that yes, it's it's already on the cards. So are we happy? I'm happy to move we note.
And I'll second that for the record.
Great.
Liz?
Yeah, sorry, Mark.
Yeah, sure. Should I just come in on that? I mean, yes, you're absolutely right in terms of that repetition by the scrutiny committee. And obviously, it's nothing to stop any member or even members of the public, if they want to request a road to be resurfaced, they can email us as cabinet members or even their own local member if they want to do so. So we'll look at it according to the criteria. So thank you.
Super. Yeah, I haven't taken any photos recently. I normally do of potholes. But right, so agenda item 8 we will be taking with 14. Agenda item 9 we will be taking with 15. So we'll move on to agenda item 10. And that is the Vale of Glamorgan Community Review draft proposals, and that's come from Community Liaison Committee on the 5th of October 2023. So Cabinet actually considered a report on the 5th of October on the Boundary Commission's Community Review, and that report included a total of 4 recommendations. One of which was to refer the matter to Community Liaison Committee, which is where town and community councils meet and discuss items of relevance or interest to them. So it was referred to them on the same evening, the 5th of October, and that any recommendations from Community Liaison would be brought back to Cabinet for further consideration, which is why we've got this reference. We can see that there are very detailed minutes of the meeting, a Community Liaison, and very in-depth discussion of the detail of the proposals. And so there's been a lengthy and detailed recommendation back to Cabinet asking that we note and consider the detailed comments raised by many members of that committee in relation to both the specific situation relating to individual town and community councils, as well as more general matters of principle. In particular, I think it's worth drawing attention to the debate around the boundary between St Nicholas and Wenvoe, which would appear to require some adjustment given the discussion that ensued in Community Liaison Committee. Given the current position and given that the proposed response to the Boundary Commission as presented initially to Cabinet on the 5th of October is based on very sound principles as set out in the report, I would move as follows, and this is basically to make sure that we note the comments made by Community Liaison Committee to enable us to send a response by 30th of October 2023 as required, so that the Commission can consider the views expressed through Community Liaison Committee, and that the proposals fully reflect the comments made at the committee in relation to this particular boundary, and to ensure that the response can be issued within the given timeline of the 30th of October as mentioned. So the recommendations that I would move are that the comments from the Community Liaison Committee are noted, that the response to the Boundary Commission as set out in paragraphs 2.7 to 2.26 of the report to Cabinet on the 5th of October are approved, and a copy of this report be forwarded to the Boundary Commission as the formal response to the consultation. 3, that in pursuance of Resolution 2, a full copy of the minutes of Community Liaison Committee are also forwarded to the Boundary Committee, so that the Commission can consider all views expressed by members of that committee, so that they have the full picture of the views of town and community councils as well. The delegated authority be given to the Chief Executive in consultation with myself as leader to further amend the suggested boundary between St Nicholas and Bomvelston and Wenvoe, or that community area, so that Twyn Erodin is shown as being retained within the Wenvo community ward. So that was the specific area that they were discussing, and that the urgency procedure is set out at section 1514 of the council's constitution be used in respect of recommendations 2 to 4, inclusive as above, and that is so that we can meet the deadline for submission, and I would therefore move.
And I'll second that recommendation.
Thank you.
Liz.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know that some of you were present at that meeting. I wasn't, unfortunately. So over to you, Rhiannon.
Thank you. Having read that, I was at the Community Liaison Committee, and obviously I've heard discussions about this from various different points of view. And I think that the report is a very fair representation of what went on in that committee. You know, there were lots of quite different viewpoints expressed there, some completely opposed to each other. But I think that the report is a very balanced representation of what went on there. So I'm pleased to see it go forward.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's worth, I think I've mentioned before, but I think it's worth restating that actually, apart from asking for wide views, that there was a cross-party working group on this within the council, with representatives of all groups to come to an area, and those then could talk to other members within the council. So it went right out across the council, and I think that we've come up with quite a detailed and objective report and plus the minutes to send off to the Boundary Commission. So thank you all. Agenda item 11, we're going to take with agenda item 17. And then so we'll now move on to agenda item 12, which is the Cardiff Capital Regional Cabinet of the 31st of July 2023. And as most meeting minutes are these days, they're fairly abridged. A number of areas were under discussion. The Joint Committee Revenue Budget final outturn position, the Q4 performance in terms of the annual business plan, engagement with regional higher and further education, which was an interesting report, and then there were reports on a number of different initiatives. So there was the UK Semiconductor Strategy report and how that fits, the fit of that with the CCR semiconductor strategy. There were also discussion of some exempt items, which was the CSE Foundry Limited, the Northern Valleys Initiative, and the Fibre to Premises Initiative. So, as ever, these minutes should be read alongside the actual agenda, which is available on the Capital Region website, so that you can look at the reports that were taken and then the outcomes from them. So I'm happy on that basis to move that we note the report.
And I'll second that.
And the next one is the appointment of Local Authority Governors Advisory Panel on the 11th of October. And that's, as chair, that would be for Rhiannon.
Okay, thank you. Well, we met. It was a properly attended meeting. It was very pleasing that virtually all of the vacancies had been filled. We approached a couple of people to see if they would take on more than one school, and they consented to do so. And it was very pleasing to see how many experienced governors have been put back onto governing bodies. and also interesting to see how many people were recommended by their chair of governors and asked to return, which I think speaks well for governing bodies that we have such experienced and valued valued members of governing bodies. None of those recommended were councillors, actually. They were all lay members, which I think speaks even more highly for the calibre of people coming forward to be on our boards of governors. So I'd like to commend the reports to Cabinet.
Thank you, Rhiannon, and I'm happy to second that.
Thank you.
So moving on to agenda item 14. This is where it gets complicated. So I should adjust my papers. So agenda item 14, we are going to look at the same time as referring or looking at the references that have come from the three scrutiny committees under item 4, item 5 and item 8. So in essence, this is being sent to us for endorsement of the final draft Vale Glamorgan annual self-assessment report, which incorporates the key findings from engagement with our key stakeholders. So this is all part of the cycle where we set plans, we work to deliver against those plans, we monitor throughout the year, which is another report that we have in front of us, and then we go through a period of self-assessment to review how we delivered against our plans. And I think that what's come out of some of these references is actually the nub of that, is whether or not we are measured against what we said we'd do, or whether we are measured against what people think we ought to do. And that's actually quite an interesting question for us going forward. So if we look at agenda item 4, and that was the reference from Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee. And I think where it was recognised that there was a tremendous amount of work that had actually gone into the self-assessment report. There was a query about whether or not there should be a bite-size version of the report, rather than it being complex, to make it easy to read. And that's actually quite interesting, because a comment on a different scrutiny about that as well. And I think that this scrutiny also picked up, as part of the introduction to the report, that it should clearly outline that it would be addressing areas that the council said it would do, so that in the planning process, these are the things that we plan to do. Have we delivered against those? And also to highlight our need to prioritise essential services. They felt that consideration should also be given to include a statement around the council's ambitions and aspirations. I think that's interesting, because a lot of that comes into the annual delivery plan, doesn't it? That, you know, we have so many different reports, plans and monitoring reports, but at the end of the day, that's what governance is all about. It felt important that we encourage Vale residents to participate and engage in the self-assessment process, and that would be absolutely brilliant. I mean, it gets taken to scrutiny, etc., where everyone can attend, but if we can do more, that would be even better. The process as it is that we have a whole range of assessments to start off with, which includes peer reviews, it includes scrutiny chairs sitting down with cabinet members and directors and going through all the reports, that sort of thing. But if we can get more local resident input, that would be great. And communication is vital. So it was also felt that it should be looked to as to whether or not the engagement in the self-assessment process would be increased if the information was provided in different formats. And it's an interesting one because the presentations that have been given to various committees, etc., are very informative. And there is a question whether or not we should be looking at making those more easily available in terms of the public. In relation to the Governance and Audit Committee, they looked at this the same report on and their views were that they felt that the report was easily accessible given the level and detail of information provided. And I think that's quite interesting because that was a Governance and Audit Committee that are used to looking at complex reports, and they felt that it was accessible. So I think we need to look at somewhere in between. They wanted extra context in view of agency staff and the percentage of overall council salaries that agency contracts make, and also to add in some information regarding the council's policies around the use of staff employed via agencies. Now, we've got a report to do with our contract and stuff with agencies later, but I do have a note that in the information we give in terms of our year in numbers section of the annual self-assessment report, that it will say that the council spent 198.951 million in 2022-23 on employee salaries at schools and non-schools. The total spend on agency contracts was 15.8 million, and that's 9.3 million schools and 6.5 million non-schools, and that equates to 7.9% of the total salary spend. So that information that was requested is now available in the our year in numbers section. There was a query about who were the target audiences for the report, and I think that harps back is to making sure that it's relevant to different groups. Consideration should be given to sort of balanced opinions within it, because, and I think the comment was made, and an interesting comment, that council tax rises but the level of services are decreasing, and I think that it's exactly where we see ourselves when we are setting budgets, is if we don't have sufficient funding to do everything, we have to prioritise. And we've just had the conversation about potholes, and therein lies a rub, you know. So what do you do in terms of caring for our most vulnerable versus non-statutory services? So there's some interesting comments there. A comment about sort of Brexit being mentioned but detail not being given, needing more of a commentary around Project Zero. The whole thing about increased technology and hybrid meetings. Well, hopefully we'll be doing that soon. Reference to staff absence days. So it's things are mentioned. Maybe there should be more information on it, and how we present whether we've achieved or missed targets. And I'll come on to that because that's on another scrutiny committee reference as well, so which is a bit more detailed. So those are the that's the input of governance and audit, and then we have to move on to agenda item 8, and this is from Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee, and the recommendation from there was that their comments be passed to us, and some of that was they want more reference or more further emphasis on the the reflections and views of residents on council services, and I think that is valid. But I think there should be more discussion of the reflections and views of residents to put it into context, and hopefully when we feed back on the latest sort of customer survey, you know, the one that's ongoing at the moment, there'll be an opportunity to discuss that. It's also important for the council to communicate to the public about the services it provided, what it could provide and what it could not do due to the current economic and other pressures it faced. And I think it's an interesting one again, is if you're looking at that from, we talk about that normally in the budget setting, we talk about it in the annual delivery plan, service plans, that sort of thing. And should we keep repeating it every time we look into monitoring reports? I don't know. But if it makes the report, I suppose, more relevant, then I think perhaps we might have to have a look at it, and to have greater clarity in the report concerning its scope and purpose, in that it was reporting on those areas and services that the council said it would and had done. So I think that is the whole thing, is being facetious. If somebody said, you haven't painted all the buildings pink, and we said, well, we hadn't planned to paint all the buildings pink. It's those sorts of conversations. It's communicating effectively what our proposals, what our annual delivery plan was, and therefore what we're measuring about. So I think actually, in terms of scrutiny, some interesting comments, and I think that we should note those and seek to take them on board in our planning and in our monitoring going forward. So the recommendations that we have before us for these reports, I think first of all I would say that I would move that we note the views of scrutiny committees, and officers obviously have already taken them on board in terms of this report, and that the three recommendations before us today are a bit complex, but that Cabinet considers the consultation summary findings and endorses the updated final draft Baillie Glamorgan Annual Self-Assessment Report 2022-23, appended at Appendix A. Secondly, that Cabinet refers the final draft Baillie Glamorgan Annual Self-Assessment Report to Governance and Audit Committee on the 23rd of October for their consideration and approval in line with their statutory role under Part 6, Section 114 of the Local Government and Elections Act, Wales 2021, and that upon consideration, the committee refers any recommendations back to Cabinet for their final consideration. That would be on the 2nd of November 2023, prior to Cabinet referring this report, the comments of the Governance and Audit Committee and Cabinet's responses to Council on the 20th of November of this year for consideration and approval. Should Governance and Audit Committee have no further comments to refer to Cabinet for consideration, that the final draft Baillie Glamorgan Annual Self-Assessment Report be referred to full Council on the 20th of November 2023 for consideration and approval. And finally, that the use of paragraph 1514(2)(2) of the Council's Constitution, urgent decision procedure, be authorised to allow the final draft of the Baillie Glamorgan Annual Self-Assessment 2022-23 be referred to the Governance and Audit Committee meeting taking place on the 23rd of October 2023 for consideration, with any recommendations considered by Cabinet on the 2nd of November 2023 prior to full Council consideration on the 20th of November 2023. So as I said, that's all to do really with where this report goes next and how the different routes by which it will end up in full Council on the 20th of November. and I would therefore move.
And I'll second those recommendations.
Move those around. So we have we've been doing the annual self-assessment of last year's performance, and now agenda item 15 is the annual delivery plan monitoring report Q1 performance for 2023-24. So we're actually now coming to this year and looking at the first year's the first quarter's performance. And there's actually some interesting parts from the self-assessment report that maybe we need to think of in terms of this report. We can consider with this agenda item 9, which is the reference from Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee on the 20th of September 2023. And the recommendations that they made from that was that first of all, the first recommendation was that they noted the report, and then the second recommendation was to pass on some recommendations or some comments to us, and this was to do with the clarity of the report, which actually I think is worth looking at in the way that it's actually presented. That some areas were currently shown as grey in order to make clear that those areas were not currently monitored or not available on a quarterly basis, or only just started to be monitored, so that there was no baseline. And that also that where areas of the report in Appendix C were given a red rating, it should be clear that if that red rating was due mainly because there was no update on progress as yet, it might be an annual measurement or something like that, and so it should be clear within the reports going forward that exactly why those areas couldn't be taken as, oh heavens, you know, this area's failed. It's the report on it might not be due for another month, and so that might come up. So the closer we can get to that level of clarity, that would be helpful. So the performance overall was good in terms of the 3 corporate plan wellbeing objectives. They had a green performance status as at Q1. As I said, this is first quarter of 4, so we're fairly early in the years. 90% of planned activities outlined in the annual delivery plan have been awarded a green status, and of the 173 performance measures aligned to the corporate wellbeing plan objectives, data was reported for 43 measures where a performance status was applicable, and 51% were green, 12 were amber, and 37% red. But a performance status wasn't applicable to 129 measures, and I think that comes back to the queries about at what point are different measures actually available to be assessed. You probably need to have a look at that. So we had the reference of 1 scrutiny, but all 5 scrutiny committees have reviewed Q1 performance reports between the 12th of September and the 20th of September 2023, with all noting the performance results and progress to date in relation to the annual delivery plan, with the exception of Corporate Performance and Resources Committee, as we've just seen. So we've only got 2 recommendations on this report. and that's that Cabinet considers the Q1 performance reports and progress towards achieving the annual delivery plan 2023-24 commitments as aligned to our corporate plan wellbeing objectives. And 2, that Cabinet consider the views and recommendations of scrutiny committees in relation to Q1 performance and approve identified remedial actions as the basis to address areas of underperformance and tackle the key challenges identified. So on that note, I would so move, and I would imagine that Q2 will be coming before too long at all. So happy to move.
And I'll second those, Leader.
Thank you. Keep checking I haven't got a reference to come with items. So going on to agenda item 16, and this is quite interesting because it does chime with a report that went to corporate performance and resources scrutiny yesterday in relation to cost of living, etc. And that the reference from that will actually be coming to us probably at the next cabinet meeting. It's a shame that we couldn't quite get the timings to work in terms of the decisions that had to be taken with this report. But anyway, this report sets out the proposals regarding use of cost of living reserve that was established as part of the 2023-24 budget. As we know, that when we're setting budgets, we actually will put money into reserves as our way of having that pot of money available to pay for what we want to achieve, either through the year or through the coming years. And this is exactly what we did last year. We put some money aside. The report also provides an update on decisions made regarding the use of the reserve to date. And so, as we mentioned, a reserve of 854,000 was established to fund work to alleviate the pressures of the cost of living crisis. I've just spotted that it's probably worth amending for the minutes. On 1.1, it talks about the cost of living crisis, but I don't think that's relevant for today. So far, the reserve's been used to provide additional funding to Citizens Advice, to provide additional support to those in receipt of free school meals, to assist with cost of food over the school summer holidays, and to contribute to the additional costs associated with the rollout of universal free school meals in primary schools, because there has been costs associated with that too for local government. I think it's important to mention about the additional funding for Citizens Advice, because the support that they have provided to local residents has been absolutely invaluable. And I'd have to look up, but there is a multiplying effect in terms of every pound that is spent in Citizens Advice. The actual impact in terms of increased income, in terms of access to support, etc., is quite a substantial multiplier. The cost of living crisis and work to tackle poverty continue to be a priority, not just for us, but also for the Vale Public Service Board. And Audit Wales have actually published 3 reports, which were discussed in the Scrutiny Committee last night, to look at the challenge of tackling poverty in Wales, and work's being undertaken to respond to those reports. Our data tells us, and we get a regular update on the economic impact on our communities in the Vale of Glamorgan, and the data continues to tell us that there are issues of poverty right across the Vale of Glamorgan, for people who are working or for people who are unemployed. The cost of living crisis is continuing to cause hardship, with increasing issues in terms of food, energy and housing. And in terms of housing, many more people are being affected now because of the number of landlords that are deciding no longer to be in the rental market, the number of people that are having problems with rising interest rates on their mortgages. So, you know, this is actually a major problem. But it's obviously our poorer communities are even more acutely affected. So we've been working with partners in terms of activities on homelessness, housing support, money advice, benefits entitlements, employment support, period poverty, access to food, the big box Boyd, which actually has been an idea created or a concept created in the Vale that is actually supporting people right across Wales now in many different venues. Free activities for children and young people, childcare, and I don't think we can underestimate the impact of the work that's actually being undertaken through our schools. Very many schools in the Vale of Glamorgan are reaching out into their local communities to provide support. Work's also continuing to refresh the cost of living analysis undertaken in the winter of 2022. Last year we had a network of warm spaces, and while there is no specific funding for that, Welsh Government have awarded about 33,400 to the Vale Council as part of the Direct Food Support Scheme for 23-24. So 11 local projects have been allocated funding, and they've also made funding available for food partnerships. And the Vale was very successful in receiving £97,000 for that money. So to date, the following funding has been agreed: the budget contribution for free school meals, which was approved as part of the budget in 2023. Additional contribution for citizens' advice, additional support in the school summer holidays to those in receipt of free school meals, and support for community projects. And it's actually proposed that 25,000 is allocated in 23-24, and a further 25,000 in 24-25 to support work within the community. And for example, warm spaces provided by community groups across the Vale, and that funding would be administered by officers in the Corporate Resources Directorate in the same way that the warm spaces and food projects have previously been allocated. It's not a huge amount of money, but actually when you're working within communities, it's quite phenomenal what an existing community group can do to make that funding work and support people. There have been contributions to the food bank this year, and it's proposed that 3,500 from the reserve is used to increase the amount already allocated, and a total of 20,000 is awarded for 2024-25, recognising the continued pressures around food costs and increasing numbers. A further £30,000 for citizens' advice to top up their annual grant in recognition of the increase in the volume, and then finally discretionary housing payments, hugely important because of the way that rents have gone up, etc., and quite often the support and benefits that people can access just don't cover their rents. And discretionary housing payments has been something that has been available to us over the years, but I haven't really until more recent years known a time where that money ran out. We've normally, people have been supported through other avenues, but it's proposed that £50,000 is added to the discretionary housing payment fund in 2023-24, and again in 2024-25. So if you look at paragraph 2.8 on page 5 and going over onto page 6, that actually lays out that, you know, where we started in terms of 854,000 at the beginning of this year, by the time we get through to 2025-26, with the proposals, we will be down to a level of about £100,000. At the moment, I can't see the pressure going away, so, you know, where we go after that, I'm not sure. Eddie, do you want to come in before I sort of give the recommendations?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. It's just to give you a break as well. That really, when you talk about some of these reports, you just it's only when you come to speak to the individuals that it's impacted on do you realise how although these are relatively small sums in compared to what we've got on the budget, they are so necessary. We'd like to do more, but the impact on the individuals that take that support, particularly as you mentioned, citizen advice and the food banks. I've heard of some cases which are eye-watering really, but at least we've been in a position where we have been able to make a difference to those that need it. And you know, the food through the schools is another classic one, which many would argue that we shouldn't need to do that, but if you're the person that's receiving it, then you're more than grateful. So I fully support this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so the recommendations that are before us today are that Cabinet approve the proposal for the use of the cost of living reserve for a ring-fence sum to support community projects with £25,000 in 2023-24 and a further £25,000 in 2024-25. And to delegate authority to Director of Corporate Resources in consultation with the Executive Leader and Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources to develop and agree specific criteria for the use of this funding to meet needs within the community. Secondly, the Cabinet approve the proposal for the use of the cost of living reserve to provide funding to the Vale Food Bank with an allocation of £3,500 in 2023-24, in addition to the funding already received and £20,000 in 2024-25. Thirdly, that Cabinet approve the proposal for the use of the cost of living reserve to provide £30,000 funding to Citizens Advice in 2024-25, in addition to the funding already agreed. And that Cabinet approve the proposal for the use of the cost of living reserve to provide an extra £50,000 to discretionary housing payment fund in 2023-24 and again in 2024-25. As you said, Eddie, not massive sums of money, but actually areas where we know that they will have proven outcomes in terms of supporting local residents for whom life is very difficult at the moment. I would so move.
And I'll second those.
Thank you. So going over to agenda item 17, and this is where I have to juggle my papers again because it's agenda item 11 was a reference from Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee. This is related to the new independent living policy. This report has been, I should imagine Eddie's going to want to speak on this one as well, but this has been a long time coming, but I think that this is such a positive way forward for so many people in the Vale of Glamorgan. The draft independent living policy, which is included at Appendix A, outlines the Vale of Glamorgan Council's strategy to facilitate home adaptations that preserve individuals' independence in their homes, particularly those in need of assistance. It establishes guidelines, informs those wishing to apply about available provisions, and addresses individual needs effectively. And I think, you know, we lay out, if you look in the executive summary, it lays out the objectives, what we're actually trying to achieve with this policy. And this is about us all working together in the council, because at the moment, if you need some form of disabled facilities, then you could have to talk to one of three different departments because of the way in which it currently works. So this would include people working together. It would help people to remain independent. It would provide clear guidance on what the expected outcomes would be for applicants. It would pull together, it would incorporate all the different relevant advice and guidance available, and actually look at a new discretionary adaptations grant. And it would enable individuals, and the word in that is used, which is actually quite good, is it enables individuals to thrive at home. And thrive is very important, because as well as independence, it's also about dignity. It's also about people being able to live at home with confidence that they have the right equipment, the right facilities. And it, by enhancing independence and well-being, it will hopefully enable them to maintain their autonomy and quality of life. So what does that mean in reality? I mean, as I said, at the moment, it's a number of teams across the council provide support. It's normally assessed by an occupational health officer. Homeowners, occupiers, landlords, private tenants can apply for a disabled or disability facilities grant to adapt a property, providing there's a disabled person living in the property as their main residence. And the disabled facilities grant is currently subject to a financial means test for adult applicants of home adaptations. So there's no means testing for parents of dependent disabled children. But in some ways, the means testing is quite difficult, because you might not hit the barriers in terms of means testing, or the criteria in terms of means testing, but you might actually not have the money available to do those, to install the different adaptations, etc. And that is a major issue for many people. So statutory limit for grant aid for the mandatory disabled facilities grant is 36,000, where the cost of adaptations exceeds that grant limit, and it's not reasonable for the disabled applicant to use the relocation grant to move to a more suitable property. The council will fund a discretionary disabled facility grant. The policy, the draft policy, has already gone to Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee, and they had a look at it. They have referred it to us. This was a form of pre-scrutiny that happened. Just getting the reference back from them. It was widely welcomed, but I think the only point that they brought up was to do with advocacy support for people who might be applying, to make sure that they had somebody supporting them. And I think that potentially there is a need to make sure that there is signposting to possible advice for an advocacy within the report, because if it's a report policy that's going to last for a while, you couldn't actually specifically name people, but you could tell them where the support was available. So I think that would be a good way forward. So if you look at paragraph 2.3 and 2.4, that actually spells out what happens with small adaptations, medium and large adaptations, and I attended a meeting with Care and Repair Cardiff and the Vale the other day, and the work that they do is absolutely superb, and can actually quite often get some facilities put in within 2 to 4 weeks. So that's a major thing. But if you look at paragraph 2.5, this says, well, what are we actually looking at doing in the future? And this is talking about for medium or large adaptations. There will be 3 options, and that's disabled facilities grant with a means test and resultant financial contribution and a 10-year charge on the property that people are living in. Secondly, a discretionary adaptations grant without a means test, but with a lifetime charge on the property. So if you've got a property but you can't afford to put the facilities in, then there is a potential for those facilities to be installed, and then a charge put on the property, which will be paid back to the council when the house is sold at some point in the future. So that is a way of putting a charge on the property, or looking at if the property is not feasible for any sort of adaptation, etc., a grant to enable the individual to relocate. And it might be that if you live in a house where a stair lift is not a possibility, then it might be that you need to either move to a house where it is a possibility, or a bungalow or something. And so there would be potential for a relocation grant. I think in the scrutiny committee, somebody actually wanted to make the point that the houses that the council is building now are actually already built to be homes for life. So they've got a downstairs wet room, and they've got an electricity power point at the bottom of the stairs, so you can put a stair lift in very easily for people, which is a major step forward. So those are the 3 different areas, and we feel that actually this helps to look at people's long-term well-being. It focuses on removing potential barriers for well-being. And it's quite interesting if you look at section, going on from sort of section 3.3 onwards. For me, they were saying about that if you've got the right level of disabled facilities adaptation, then it actually reduces people's need for care. And while that has, and this spells out the sort of financial benefits for that, for me, the benefits are also about dignity. Because if you are independent and you are able to just sort of be self-determining in terms of what you're doing with your life, it's got a huge impact in terms of everything to do with life. So I can see Eddie's got his hand up again. So I was going to move on to recommendations, but I will stop at this point and let Eddie come in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't say it before, but all the reports that you referred to earlier with references from scrutiny committees, for the public to be aware that many cabinet members are actually at those, so they get firsthand what the actual comments are being made. So that's why we've considered them, so I'm not necessarily going to repeat those. So you've gone in quite depth on this particular report, and it's right that we have a options process, but we've also improved it in that small adaptations will probably happen much quicker. You know, we've had some historic difficulties, and we with some adaptations because of the waiting list, but this is a clear way to get around that. But there's a recognition also that we as a council can't keep on paying out, and so people who are able should be able to contribute, and recognise also that we don't all have free cash sitting around. So they've got the means by using their properties. I know that doesn't meet everybody's view because they've worked for it, many of them over their lifetime, but it's still important to recognise that those that are able to should be able to contribute. And dare I say it, if you're in a position to, then you know you're helping others who can't afford to be able to pay, then at least they can have that facility. I'd also like to point out that this is in conjunction with occupational therapists and things like that, and we work with our partners. So many of the aspirations of what people want in their properties isn't necessarily what they need. If only they took some measures on looking after themselves before, and it's only when you get to the later stage that I don't want to be blunt about it, but the more we can do for ourselves, the longer it takes for the needs for those grants to come into place, and that's a reality. We've got to look at that prevention more, and but at least this policy looks at independent living, ensuring that people can actually live in their own homes rather than end up in care and the like. And one of the points that's not actually mentioned in the report but has been dealt with through the officers is and have had many questions about the armed forces, the covenant, and whether they have to pay through. And I'll just clarify again that the armed forces, due to the covenant, personnel do not are not detrimented by this policy either. So they are benefited, so they're not means tested either. So I just needed that to be clarified so that for the benefit of any future meetings that I attend. So thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. And Gwyn, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just quickly, Leader, I welcome this report because I go back 15, 20 years down the line where you were tearing your hair out to try and help constituents with these problems of providing facilities and keeping them in their home. This will certainly, it gives the guidelines, it gives the direction, and obviously there's always some question at the end of the day about funding that's available at the end, but certainly this will give an opportunity to so many, and I'm delighted to see things moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you both. And yeah, I absolutely agree. And I do also have to say a huge thank you, because there were little tweaks and little differences and things in the way in which different departments, because of their own needs, dealt with the situation, and the way in which that they sort of sat down and worked through it, so that we've actually got one policy now that is a lot clearer. I would really like to thank them for the amount of work that they've put into it, and yeah, it's hopefully this will make a big difference to quite a number of people within the Vale. So the 4 recommendations that we've got on this are: the Cabinet considers any comments received from Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee on the 11th of October 2023. Well, we have considered them, and I would note those comments. The Cabinet approves the independent living policy attached to Appendix A to this report. Thirdly, the delegated powers to be granted to the Head of Finance and Monitoring Officer / Head of Legal and Democratic Services to apply any appropriate financial conditions on grants awarded under the policy. And finally, that delegated powers to be granted to the Directors of Place and Social Services to make any necessary non-material amendments to the independent living policy. And I would so move.
And I'll second that.
Thank you. Everyone's in agreement. That's super. And then we're on to agenda item 18, and this is one of two reports relating to this item. We have this one, and then at agenda item 22 we have a part 2 report, so I'll return to that later because the other report deals with the confidential parts of the matter. So as we've talked previously, and then it's been mentioned in some of the other reports so far, there is a requirement for agency workers to support council services. You know, sometimes it's a boost in numbers at key times, or sometimes it's to gain specialist competence. And any agency provision that we get is managed through external provision. So we work with an external contractor, and the current contract is due. It's been in place since 2019, and it's going to expire on the 31st of October this year. Cabinet would remember that not that long ago we formed a collaborative procurement partnership between us alongside Cardiff Council, Monmouthshire and Torvine. And so this is actually something that's happened as a result of that. That new service is now called Ardal, which is what, you know, it's been called under that. And in terms of this, each authority will establish its own contract, but the actual ultimate contract has been decided as part of the procurement arrangement. The successful provider will commence work with each council from the 1st of November, but the award notice will be issued to the successful agency during week commencing 23rd, so next week. And it's proposed that each authority will enter into a contract for a period of 5 years with the option of a 2-year extension subject to performance. As I said, the detail will be discussed in the part 2 report. So in terms of the excuse me, the recommendations for the part 1 report is that the contents of the report be noted and considered in connection with the part 2 report later on in the agenda. And secondly, that the use of the urgent decision procedure as set out in section 1514 of the Council's Constitution be used in respect of the recommendations contained within the part 2 report. And in effect, that's so that the contract can be awarded by the expiry date of the 31st of October. And so I would move those recommendations.
And I'll second those recommendations.
So I'm going to have a breather while other people have reports and try and get my voice back. So we'll move on to agenda item 19, and this is one for the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood and Building Services about Seal Park in Dinas Powys. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Leader, and I'm very pleased to present this report to Cabinet this afternoon. This report is concerning the transfer of Seal Park, and I need to be careful how I spell it. It's S-E-E-L. So it's no relation to a certain animal that we're all very fond of, and in Dinas Powys. Now, we've been approached by Dinas Powys Community Council, along with the Friends of Seal Park, to transfer this park over. And we've had detailed negotiations, discussions with the Community Council and the Friends Group over a period of time, and we now reached a good conclusion. So I'm delighted to move to recommendations. And the following recommendations are that the monitoring officer, Head of Legal and Democratic Service in conjunction with Director of Environment and Housing Services be authorised to advertise disposal of the open space in accordance with section 123(2)(a) of a Local Government Act 1972, with any objections received being reported to Cabinet for consideration. Number 2, that's subject to recommendation 1, authority is granted to transfer Seal Park in Dinas Powers to the responsibility of Dinas Powers Community Council on a 19-year lease in accordance with the Council's protocol approved in 2018 for the operation and transfer of assets or services to town and community councils in the Vale of Glamorgan. That's number 3, that's subject to recommendation 1, Director to Environment and Housing Services in conjunction with the Head of Finance, Section 151, and the Monitoring Officer, Head of Legal and Democratic Office be authorised to agree terms and conditions for a 99-year lease to Dinas Powers Community Council for Peppercorn Went and include covenants to maintain the land as public open space. The subject to recommendation is number 4, second recommendation 1, authority is granted to the Monitoring Officer, Head of Legal and Democratic Services to prepare, execute and complete all necessary documentation in connection with the transfer of the land to Dinas Powers Community Council. And number 5, the subject being agreed with the Dinas Powers Community Council, a deed of dedication with fields in trust be progressed by the Director of Environment and Housing Services in conjunction with relevant other officers. And I so move.
Thank you, Mark. I'm happy to agree. And it's actually quite interesting is in looking at the recommendations about the area of woodland that would benefit from greater management and the way in which Dinas Powers Community Council have actually worked very closely with the Vale Council's local nature partnership officer, and have been doing some very constructive stuff. I think that this is a really good move for that area. So I said absolutely no hesitation in seconding that. Have I got everybody else's support on this one as well? Yeah, everyone nodding.
Thank you.
Yes. And then moving over to the Cabinet Member for Public Sector Housing and Tenant Engagement, with a report of Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence 2023 to 2028. Over to you, Sandra.
Thank you, Leader. So today, the purpose of the report is to seek adoption of the Cardiff and Vale of Glamorgan Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Strategy for 2023 to 28, and to agree the funding that supports the delivery of VAUDAS strategy. Okay, so violence against women and domestic abuse and sexual violence is a fundamental violation of human rights, and both a cause and a consequence of inequality. Tackling violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence has far-reaching consequences for women, men, children, families and communities and a society as a whole. Tackling these enduring social problems requires a distinct and proportionate approach to all victims and perpetrators in order that everyone can live fear-free in safe, equal and violence-free communities. The Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Act, Wales 2015, laid out a requirement for local authorities and health boards to jointly prepare regional strategies to tackle this issue. Over the last 5 years, the Vale of Glamorgan Council has worked successfully with Cardiff to deliver actions against VAUDAS 2018 to 23 strategy. This delivery has resulted in significant improvements to the prevention and protection of victims of domestic and sexual abuse and their families. Cardiff and the Vale of Glamorgan Council have worked together to create a new strategy that reflects the needs of those who are affected by VAUDAS. This strategy, it's in our hands, presents a vision that all who live, work and study in and visit Cardiff and the Vale of Glamorgan can live positive, independent lives without being affected by violence and abuse. This new strategy is accompanied by an implementation plan that sets out a series of commitments to deliver this vision. So what I would say is that it's overseen by the Safer Vale Partnership, which is chaired by the Director of Environment and Housing Services, the Safer Vale Partnership Strategic Board, responsible for reducing crime, disorder, and work of the Safer Vale Partnership feeds into the Public Service Board. So this draft strategy, it's in our hands, presents a vision of for everybody who lives, as I said, within Cardiff and the Vale of Glamorgan, that they live positive, independent lives without being affected by violence and abuse. The preventative side of the strategy places strong emphasis on the importance of prevention through the development of educational programmes within schools and universities, as well as training for professionals in both the private and public sectors. And I know sort of councillors recently have had the opportunity to undertake training for the Ask and Act training that we undertook, that was very useful and gave you the sort of the knowledge and the skills of what you might need to use if you're working with the public, as councillors do, but also are members of the Vale of Glamorgan Council who come into contact with the public. So the strategy intends to achieve this through the following aims. So the following aims are that we're prepared. So prepare to improve strategic planning and commissioning of VAUDAS services through a more coordinated partnership approach across the region to pursue, which is to address perpetrators of domestic violence and sexual abuse by improving intelligence sharing across services and the use of legal powers to disrupt and convict. Prevent, which proactively addresses negative attitudes and behaviours that have the potential to result in violence against women and domestic abuse, recognising this as everyone's business. To protect and improve multi-agency responses and support all victims and their children, regardless of risk level and needs. And I know within the Vale of Glamorgan we have target hardening for survivors of domestic violence who want to live within the home, stay within the home, and target hardening helps to protect those people that remain in their homes. And support as the last aim, which ensures that innovative, flexible and evidence-based services are available to meet the needs of victims experiencing any form of VAUDAS. Okay. Before I go on to the recommendations, I see that Councillor John has got his hand up. Oh, I can't hear you. Sorry. I think you're on. Oh,
I would just like to welcome the strategy. It's been a time coming, but quite honestly, I've so many people live in fear day in, day out, and with behaviour on the increase, I think that this will certainly go a long way in working with Cardiff, the Vale together, to protect people and give them confidence in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor John. I agree wholeheartedly, and the team that we have within the Vale of Glamorgan is excellent. You know, I've had the opportunity to work with them as when I was domestic violence champion for the Vale of Glamorgan Council, and the service that they provide is second to none. So yes, I welcome the strategy. So if we can just move on to the recommendations. So the recommendations that Cabinet adopts the Cardiff and Vale of Glamorgan VAUDAS strategy 23 to 28, that Cabinet approves the allocation of Welsh Government funding to support the Council's response to the Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Act 2015, that the Monitoring Officer, Head of Legal and Democratic Services, is authorised to draft and execute the necessary form of contract with the providers of VAUDAS services. And the last one is that further reports on the Council's actions in satisfying our duties under the Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Act 2015 are provided in due course. So I'd like to move those recommendations.
Thank you, Sandra. And yes, I'm absolutely delighted to second those. And you know, I think that the strategy is comprehensive. I think aim 3 for me is probably one of the strongest, particularly in relation to the work that some of our young women and girls have been doing in the Vale in terms of Her Voice Wales, and tackling some of the issues around sexual assault and sexual violence, and some of the other issues such as coercive control. I mean, it's actually quite insidious, and it can affect people's whole lives in terms of forming a barrier to them participating. So no, I think absolutely super, and thank you for bringing this today. And I've seen lots of people nodding, so I'm assuming that is agreed. Super. So for us, as previously mentioned, we do have an item for discussion on today's agenda under item 22. So first of all, I need to just mention that I don't have any urgent items under 21 in case anyone was waiting for that. So part 2 items are matters that are considered to be confidential, and therefore the meeting will need to move into private session where confidential matters can be discussed under part 2. Therefore, if I can ask for Cabinet to move part 2 and ask the Cabinet Officer to stop the recording of this open session to ensure that no members of the public are present after this point, and only allow relevant parties to remain to hear the detail of the items to be discussed. Following the meeting, the outcome of the part 2 discussions will be formally captured as part of the minutes of the meeting and will advise all parties of the final decisions of the Cabinet for the relevant items. So if I could therefore formally move part 2.
And I'll formally second that.
Thank you. And therefore ask the Cabinet Officer to ensure that only relevant parties remain from this point on, and for the live stream and recording to be stopped, please.